I also have my, okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is our next installment of Living Abroad with Judy Francis. Thank you for joining us. Debbie, to turn cameras on and join in the discussion. When you have questions, just jump in.
Hey, you're going to put them on? Okay. All right. So I can't see any of you right now, but those of you, I'm Judy Francis, the third of 8 presentations entitled Living Abroad, Perspectives on Race and Culture. During my career as a U.S. diplomat, I spent over 22 years living abroad in various countries. In each session, I'm going to repeat that I am not doing this as an expert. These are simply my perspectives and my experiences. And I would love this to be interactive and find out some of your experiences and your reactions.
And actually, since we're pretty open, what I can have you do is just kind of angle your chair. That way.
Okay.
Your camera.
That's even better.
Yeah.
Okay, because I know some of you have as much experience abroad as you do. So anytime you want to jump in, please feel free. I also apologize because I was having computer problems. I had expected to be able to show you some visuals and also to have a reference sheet. On that reference sheet, I was going to include my my personal email, and I'll be glad to give it to you now or later. It's very easy. It's Judy D. Francis at hotmail.com. I'll repeat it at the end too. Francis is Francis. If you do email me, please put OLLI in the subject matter, so I won't just delete it thinking it's spam mail from somebody I don't know. Okay, I'm going to begin with something that I forgot to mention from the Mexico presentation because it's sort of humorous. As I had mentioned, I was working under the Reagan administration, and the State Department is supposed to be non-political. We have people from all different walks of life, and we're not supposed to mix politics. But they called all of the first tour officers down to a meeting, and the meeting, among other things, was to inform us that we are not working for the U.S. government. We are part of the executive section. Therefore, we work under the president. And as such, we are supposed to promote anything that the president has said. At that time, he had said the Soviet Union represents the evil empire. And so we were told, you are diplomats 24 hours a day. And even if you go to social things or personal visits, you are expected to always refer to the Soviet Union as the evil empire and to represent what the president has put forth. And we all sat there stunned and quiet. And then he turned to our supervisor from the counselor section who had the most, and he said, well, you supervise the majority of the first tour officers, so would you like to add anything? And Dave was very liberal, and he got up with a straight face and he said, yes, I do have something to add. He said, remember that diplomacy is the world's second oldest profession, and we must learn from the first. And I guess you guys know what the first is. And everybody was trying to hold the laughter, and this Miss Reagan representative looked at him sternly, and that ended the meeting. But getting to Paris, oh, is the volume okay? All right. This time I'm going to make it in 4 different sections because I spent some time there 4 times. And the first was the summer of 1982 when my parents, my mother, I should say, my father had passed away, took us to Europe for the first time. And we spent a whole month in Paris because my brother was there studying. And then 2 weeks traveling around. The second fragment of this presentation, in 1964, 2 years after that, my brother had convinced me to study at the Sorbonne, and so I went to study French at the Sorbonne. And then much later, in 1981, when I was doing an MBA at UCLA, I was selected for an exchange program with a French business school. And then the last segment is 1985 to 87, when I was on a 2-year assignment to the American Embassy in Paris as a diplomat. So I'll start with that first visit. My brother Chuck did his first year of college at Morehouse, and that was in the height of the civil rights movement. Chuck was very involved in that, and he became so disenchanted with the United States and our attitudes that after that freshman year, he said, I just want to get out of the country. I want to study somewhere else. And he chose to go to France. He became completely fluent in French, and also he was great saxophone player. So he started playing in clubs. My mother was distraught because in high school, Chuck was the biggest nerd. He was purely academic. He hardly socialized. He, was all, impeccably dressed, etc. And after he came back from Morehouse, he was sort of a revolutionary. He was definitely a militant and involved in the whole movement. So he had changed considerably. When we were in France visiting him, we were on the west coast of France initially, but I was going back and forth and hanging with him to meet some of his friends because we were just a year and a half different in age. And I got a chance to go to some of the jazz clubs and meet some of his friends because he was an aspiring writer. So there was a whole group of jazz musicians and writers, Black expatriates who were living in France. And just to be able to be around them and talk to them was a real learning experience for me. But after I was there for a while, I'm getting ahead of myself. At that time, I was very impressed with what seemed to be a totally different attitude as far as race in France. I learned about Josephine Baker for the first time. I'm assuming, a lot of you know who she was. She was a famous entertainer who left the US and became famous in France. She renounced her US citizenship, and she's still a star there. She's passed away a long time ago, but they've named a section after her, and she really made her mark. Some of his friends were Ethiopian that were studying in Paris. And one of them, who was an artist and became pretty renowned, he went under the name Skunder, and he later taught for several years at Howard University. Just by talking to some of the Ethiopians that I met at that time, I started realizing the depth of my ignorance. And I thought at that time, I too was involved in the movement, and I thought I knew a little bit about Africa and about the diaspora, but it really was not impressive after I started talking to people. The following summer, following year, a Christmas check came back and convinced me to come over and study there too. In the first presentation I gave, I think I talked about this conversation that took place at a cafe, and it was mostly Europeans and one African, and they could not understand the whole concept of the one drop rule, especially the fact that it only applied to Blacks. And I was coming to grips with the idea that it was a legacy from slave masters, and I couldn't really justify or explain it either. And that was the first thing that really stayed on my mind for the longest time, and I gave it a lot of thought. And it's not something that I could or would change in the States because it's part of our whole culture. But yet I started being fairly critical when we tried to apply to other societies, because not everybody thinks in the same way, and it certainly makes no sense biologically. The other surprise for me was, and I mentioned too last time, there was a guy from Mali who, at a social gathering just kept staring at me, and it was, to the point it was creepy. And then later on, he showed me why, and he showed me a picture of his mother, and it looked so much like me that it was almost scary. And he said that I looked like the people of his tribe, and they were called the Peuls. I asked him where he was born, and he said Timbuktu. And I thought he was kidding. And I said, sure, Timbuktu. And he said, what, you don't know about the history of Timbuktu? And he pulled out his passport, and it said, he was born in Timbuktu. And I, again, astounded by my own ignorance. So if any of you think it's just a word that was made up, no, it's not. It was a great empire. And then the fact that I was mistaken for so many different backgrounds. People, when I started getting fluent in French, that was both a blessing and a curse, because everybody thought that I was either from Martinique or Guadeloupe. And one time in a club, when I was in the restroom, and the girl next to me said, "Oh, finally, somebody from home." And I said, "Where's home?" And she said, La Réunion, like it. And I said, I didn't have a clue where that was. And I said, "No, I'm sorry, I'm not from there." And then we even got mistaken for somebody from Morocco or Tunisia. And for me, I had this stereotype about what the Arab world looked like, and it wasn't me. One guy, sometimes it led to confrontations, because one guy from Martinique, said, "Oh, you're just like so many of them. They come over here and they want to turn their back on their heritage," and not because he was speaking in slang, and I hadn't learned the slang of Martinique. And it was almost like if somebody comes after you, "Hey, sister," and you said, "Excuse me, I don't understand you." It was that type of thing. And he was a little bit annoyed with me, more than a little bit. I did learn some curse words from him. But again, I had to show my passport and say, no, I learned French in school. I'm sorry. So not only was it a lesson in geography, but I started expanding my idea of what the diaspora was, and realizing that sometimes here we have a pretty narrow concept of our folks throughout the world. Through my brother and his friends, I got to know quite a few of the Black expatriates. But the most exciting meeting for me was he let me go to a meeting that they had once a month with James Baldwin, who mentored a lot of he lived in France, and he mentored a lot of the young Black aspiring writers. Of course, there's a whole list of Black Americans that were expatriates in France, including Tina Turner, Chester Himes, Richard Wright. You know, I didn't meet any of those, but but and a lot of jazz artists. The thing that surprised me on my very first visit back in '62 was that in a lot of the cafes, they had jukeboxes. And among the choices on those jukeboxes were Tina Turner and B.B. King and several others that at that time in America, there was rock and roll and there was rhythm and blues, and the twain did not meet. And most of the white kids that I went to school with at LA High had no idea who Tina Turner or B.B. King was. And it wasn't until after that that they crossed over and became part of the general public's knowledge. Now, in 1964, when I was studying there, the U.S. still had military bases in France. They kicked us out in 1968 because there was a lot of friction because several things happened during that period that mainly the civil rights issue, and so anyway, they told the U.S. to take all their troops out, but that meant that there were military guys there, and on more than one occasion, I saw some serious confrontations between the white military guys and the black. So they brought some of those attitudes with them, of course. There was a well-known restaurant there in the middle of Paris called Gabby and Haynes, a soul food restaurant. Haynes was a former military guy who didn't go back to the States. He stayed in France. He married a French woman named Gabrielle, and she went by Gabby. And it was fun going there because it really felt like home, and the food was excellent. And on the walls, they had pictures of all of the famous Americans who had visited there. So that was nice. The other thing was that when I was around the Sorbonne and taking classes and talking to people, they would say, "Oh, your sister was here last year." Huh? And I said, "My sister? I don't have a sister." They said, "Oh, yeah, come on, you're from California." And I said, "I really don't have a sister." And my maiden name was Davis. Can you figure out who that was? Angela Davis. Yes. After I went back and in September of 1964, when I went back to the States, that's when she had become well known. And I read, a little bio on her and said she was at the Sorbonne in 1963. She was a French major like me, And I said, I said, why do these people keep saying, at that time too, I had a big afro, Yeah, it kind of made sense, Okay. I don't want to give the impression that being in France was like being away from racism. That was not the case. They were very sympathetic with Black Americans and what we were going through and all that, and we did get excellent treatment. However, excuse me for all listening, but I'm going to say it the way I said it to my brother. I said, it's not that they're not prejudiced. They just have different niggers. The Algerians and the Africans, the way they referred to them, they had the most menial jobs. Are they all the same stereotypes that we used to be accused of, applied to them? So I said, it was exactly the same, same stuff, same stuff. That's about all you can say. And ironically, some of the Africans that were the most numerous there were from Senegal, and they were really, suffering. But one of their most revered and respected Africans was Leopold Senghor, who was the first president of Senegal, because he was a very intelligent and high-ranking academic who did he had attained the highest honors in France, et cetera. And so, with him, they were just, they named things after him. And even now, when you talk about Senghor, they think he's wonderful. And I started realizing that one thing about the U.S. That when it works is a lot different from Europe and a lot better is the idea of social mobility. Because even in Africa, there's really a class system, an elite system that that does make it hard for somebody starting out from the bottom to make progress. When I did the MBA exchange, that was before I worked there as a diplomat. That was in 1981. I attended a school called ESSEC, which is a graduate management school, and it's in a town called Cergy-Pontoise, which is about 18 miles northwest of Paris. And I was assigned to this apartment with two French girls who were obviously from very wealthy families and were used to having servants. I was not going to be one of those servants, but I tell you, it was really hard because that was the nastiest place I ever stayed in. They could have a sink, even at a chute to put the trash in, and they would just leave stuff on the sink, and they would, and I saw that attitude toward with a lot of the students at that school, because basically to qualify, these are people that had tutors, private tutors and everything, and that's how they were able to get into this exclusive school. They also had a program there that included some Nigerians that came. They were both businessmen, and some of them were politicians, but they were definitely, the upper crust. And they had the same elitist attitude as the French. And that was another reality in terms of the perspective and learning, that, you can't make these generalizations about anybody in any group. Okay, 3 years later, I started to say that the most rudeness I'd ever seen is the way the French students at that school at ESSEC treated any of the visiting professors who didn't speak perfect French. Even if they had an accent or whatever, I mean, they would just carry on conversations loudly, while the professor was talking. They would laugh, and and I had just never seen anything quite like that. Probably would have been kicked out of most schools here if you had done that. Okay, so 3 years later, in the fall of 85, I was beginning the 2-year tour at the U.S. Embassy Paris. Also during that tour, I met and married my second husband, who was from Togo, but who had been living in France for 11 years legally. And that introduced me to a whole different part of Paris. I would say Black Paris. The nightclubs, the markets, the cuisine, some of the habits, the attitudes. I literally, once I was off of work, I was transformed into a whole nother society. I'm sure it's the same here. There's Vietnamese communities, there's Chinese communities, there, Mexican communities, et cetera. So, but it was interesting, and both of us had to really adapt to cultural differences, some big, some small. The small ones included everything from how you set the table, or what time the meals were, and just all kinds of little things. He had some friends came over. The first time we had company that were Togolese, I had prepared some food, and but it wasn't planned as a lunch or a dinner, but I was just going to serve some snacks. And I said, would you like some? And they said, oh, no, thank you. So I didn't serve them. And he came back in the kitchen and he said, what are you doing? I said, I just put the things back. He said, you have to insist because they can't say yes the first time. And I said, oh, what? I didn't know that, like, so, I learned after that, you never accept the first no. And then I had some friends that visited us, and the opposite was true. There was something that they said, oh, no, thank you. And he kept pushing and pushing. And I told him, you can't do that. If they say no, thank you, sometimes they have food allergies. Sometimes it's just food preferences, or they don't want to be impolite, but they, and accept what they say. They say what they mean, So don't push them, because one of them said, maybe I should stay in a hotel because I'm feeling uncomfortable if I'm forced to eat, forced to eat. So those are some of the many cultural differences that we did adapt to. And there was another thing that will come up in a later presentation. There was a young man that came to the embassy, a Black American young man who was spending a few days in Paris on his way back to the States because he had just finished his 2-year tour with the Peace Corps, and it happened to be in Togo. And as we got into this conversation at the embassy, I suggested that he have dinner at our house and meet my husband, who was from Togo. So he came, and it was a nice dinner. And so Theo asked him, well, did you learn any Mina, which is his original language, while you're there? And the young man said, I don't remember his name, unfortunately. He said, yeah, I did. I learned something. He said, I'm not real fluent, but yeah, I learned some Mina. And he said, like what? And he said, well, one of the first things I learned is that they called me Yovo. And my ex-husband said, well, you didn't learn much because that means white man. And he says, you're blacker than I am. He said, they couldn't have called you Yovo. And he said, yeah, they did. They called me Yovo. And of course, I couldn't be in that argument. I was like, okay. But later on, it'll come up because I've learned a lot about the various African languages and what they call white. We talked about it a little bit last week. Okay, so yeah, there were several businesses that were either owned or majority frequented by Africans in Paris. One of the things that surprised me at the African nightclubs is that people could buy like a bottle of whiskey or whatever, for their table. And then if they didn't finish it, they would just write their name on it. And it was, then they could take it the next time they came, whether that was a week or a month later. I said the health department would shut us down. So that's about it. Is anybody, are there any questions or we have to get set up for it. Okay.
So if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute, join in the conversation. Make sure you turn your cameras on too.
What was it like working at the embassy?
Well, there were two different sections, since it was just my second tour, and all officers had to do consular tours, two consular tours. So the first half of that are the visitors' visas, okay? And the other half is the American Services section. So unfortunately, I had a supervisor that, how could you say, it was very special. And we had a problem at one point with Haitian a Haitian group that was forging documents to prove their work and, like that. So they knew that there was this group. So she sent out a memo saying that anybody who is Haitian or may be Haitian has to be interviewed. And in Paris at that time, this is before right now they have French citizens can have, they don't have to get a visa. But at that time they did. And the lines were terrible. I mean, people had to come and wait in the embassy 4 or 5 hours to get interviewed, And so this basically meant that every Black person was made to wait and be interviewed last. And so a couple of us really, got on there about that. And so it was changed a little bit. But what they sometimes you see God works in mysterious ways. One of the things that got the change approved was that I had a person, they just gave you a bunch of passports and you call somebody up to your window and and so I called this name and a priest came up and I said, "Are you so and so?" He says, "No." He said, "I've been coming here for years, and every year I take a group, to I forgot what state it is, to work as volunteers, for a program, and normally put all the visas through, and we don't have to come for the interview." He said, "I've been sitting here for 4 hours waiting for these two names to be called." And I said, "Well, he said, I just want to show you. Tell me what they have in common." And I looked and not surprised to see. He says, "I had 24 visas, 24 passports. Only 2 of them have to be interviewed." And I said, "Yes, sir." And my supervisor happened to be coming in the section and I said, "Actually, I think that it would be better answered by my supervisor." And I said, "Father so-and-so has been coming for years, and he's wondering why only these 2 have to be interviewed."
Mm-hmm.
And so she sort of turned red and gave me a glare, But afterwards, we brought it up again with her supervisor, and we got it turned around. There were several little incidences with her that were disturbing, and I was very glad to get out of that section. But then when I went to the American Services section, that the supervisor there was completely different. So there weren't any real racial issues there. But working there I found it fascinating because we had everything from people just, with lost passports or that needed help with something or we had a few people that were crazy, really, really off their rockers. And for some reason, I got tagged with all of those. And this time it was not because of my color. It was because I was the only one that seemed to be able to handle them calmly without, getting upset. So, if you do something well, then you get all of them. And some of them were just, really unbelievable. But then they gave me a very special title, though. I was the death and estates officer. And that part of it was really difficult because there were a number of Americans that came to Paris and for some reason or another either got sick or died or had one man had a heart attack on the plane. I'll never forget this. And it was 3 hours before landing, and the plane was full, and all they did was put a napkin over his head, and the people next to him had to sit next to the dead guy for 3 hours. And one of them was part of his tour group, and was a very sympathetic man. He came to the embassy to do all the paperwork and stuff. And I said, boy, he said, well, they gave us free drinks. I said, they'd have to give me more than free drinks. And also at that time, AIDS was prevalent. It was just starting to be known, and it was associated with gays. And I had a young man that came in looking like he was on his last leg, and I sat down and talked to him for a long time, and he was trying to get to go back to the States, and we did that. There was a program to do that, but you had to ask certain questions. Well, do you have any friends or family and he said, most of my friends have died. And he couldn't have been more than 32 or 33. He said that I haven't seen my parents in years. We had a disagreement. I was figuring out what that was. And so I said, well, would you allow us to contact your parents? He said, I have no idea where they are. He said, they moved away from California and we haven't been in touch. And I said, well, if the State Department could find them, would you object? He said, no, I wouldn't object, but I don't think it'd do you any good. Well, they had a wonderful location system, and once he said it was okay, I put it through that office, and they found the parents in, I think, 2 days. And so I got on the phone, called them, because I didn't want any mess, And I talked to the mother, and she was in tears. She said, oh, years ago, we made a stupid decision, and, we regretted it. We've been trying to find him for years, And I said, well, he's not in good shape right now, but he said, tell me what to do. We'll send the money right away. And I said, and what about the father? The father got on the phone and said, we want him back, And so that was one of the most heartwarming, tearful reunion. I called him back in and got them on the phone together, and they sent the money like immediately. And so that things like that make you feel good. And then another guy that came in with a real attitude, he was just going to renew his passport, but yeah, well, okay. And I said, did I say anything to offend you? Or what? He said, no, I just hate coming to this place. And I said, well, is there anything I can do about that? And so he said, what it was is that a lot of people at that time here, it's accepted here now, but it wasn't before. They didn't get married. They just lived together, and I hate the word that they use for that, well, if you say it in English, it's concubine. They refer my concubine, this concubine, it just means the person that you're living with, but in English, it doesn't have the same, yeah. So anyway, he had been living with this French woman for years, and they had 2 children, 2 daughters. And when he came in to get their passports, they said, since he wasn't married, they couldn't. And I thought to myself, I didn't say it, but I said, that was just one lazy officer that didn't feel like looking up what he needs to look up, because all our laws depend on the state that you come from, no matter how long ago it was. The last state you lived in, we have to look up those laws and see what they say. And so I finally got the information out of him. He said, I don't know what that's going to do. I haven't been there in 30 years. And I said, okay, we'll see. And it turned out that his state, I don't know if it was Kansas or, anyway, his state law said that if the father recognized the kids, whether they were married or not, it didn't have to be proven in court. It didn't have, that they were recognized as his children. So I was able to get them passports, called him back in, and I said, they've been approved. All you have to do is fill out these. He was like, So sometimes you really do have things that make you feel good about working for the government. Other times you don't.
Very interesting.
Oh, I should say one other thing. There were I mentioned some of the well-known people that well-known Black expatriates that were there. Well, one of them that was really pathetic at that time was Nina Simone.
Yes.
She would come in, high as a kite and really in bad shape, and that was just heart-wrenching to me because I had so much respect for her as an artist, but she was going through a very, very hard time then. But I met her on several occasions, not in a good sense.
Mhm.
You keep up with current situations regarding our different embassies, and so are there things that you would recommend or that you would change if
There are okay. The first part of the question, I don't know if they could hear it, but do I keep up with what's happening in the embassies and various changes? Basically, no, because I've been gone for some time. I do through friends because a lot of my friends, ambassadors, and are still in Washington or have connections, and there's also a group called the Thursday Lunch Group that I'm a member of, and through them, yes, I do keep up with issues that are affecting especially the minorities in the State Department. But in terms of changes, when President Trump came in, he was just anti-State Department, period. And so many of my friends quit, and said, that because they weren't hiring, people were doing. I went through a period like that where
What happened?
do for
Here.
hours. You just
What happened?
We're having a hard time hearing.
Yes. Can't hear.
you can't hear?
No.
Now.
Okay, hold on. We'll see if we can adjust it.
Now we can hear you.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I don't know what changed. Okay. All right. I don't know what I was saying. Oh, in terms of working extra hours and so people are really, really frustrated. But the most disturbing thing to me, especially when I worked in the counselor section, because once I did my mandatory 2 tours, I switched out of there. But there's a presumption that somebody is basically lying when they say they're coming here as a tourist, and they have to prove that they're going to leave and that they're really tourists. Well, for some people, that's almost impossible to prove, and especially in certain countries. And I understand the concept, but the way a lot of times it's applied and the way it. Okay, let me put it this way: we have what's called a diversity visa, where it's just a lottery, and I don't know if they still do that anymore. But when I was in Ghana, this woman won the diversity visa, and one of the things that she had to present, there's still a lot you have to do. You have a medical and a background and all that, and your certificate of marriage. Well, a lot of people just do a traditional marriage. They don't necessarily go down and have a piece of paper. And so this young man brought his father in, and the person who interviewed the father, can you hear me? Is it going out? Okay. The person who interviewed the father was so rude and I wasn't even there, but I had gotten to know all the Ghanaians that worked there, the local, so I got a lot of information that the other officers didn't even know I knew. And this guy was a chief, and the one who interviewed him was so disrespectful, and the son actually got upset, said, "This is my father, my parents have been together for 50 something years, these are the children, but yeah, but when you hear about things like that, it's very disturbing. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, I have a question. How many of you that are listening have traveled outside of the United States?
They have.
Okay. What are some of the places? I don't know who's who, but okay, Debbie, where did you go?
I've been to India, Kathmandu, Nepal, Bangkok, and China.
Okay, all the places I haven't been. so what were some of your impressions or reactions in terms of culture or whatever?
I spent most of my time in Kathmandu, Nepal for about 2 months. So that would be the one that I would focus on. It was my dad worked for US aid to foreign countries. So
okay.
I was there. And the culture was nice. It was different. The food was different, and how the Hindus would eat. A lot of curry and spices, and then the monkeys would be quite a bit in the city, in the town, and the cows. It was different. It was.
Were you aware? I don't know if I know in India they have a strict caste system.
Oh,
and it's mostly the darker people. I don't know if that's true in Kathmandu or any of the places you noticed that anywhere.
It's been a while since I was there. So, but there weren't many of us there.
Yeah. Okay. And who's on the far side? Princella? Oh, okay. Well, Brenda will start with whoever. Brenda?
Okay. Yes, here I am. My worst experiences were in Vietnam and Zanzibar.
Oh, okay.
In Zanzibar, the custom agents threw me in a room, in a dusty room, and locked the door and insisted that I was actually from Zanzibar, pretending to be an American. And at that time, it was in 1985 when they had the United Nations Decade Conference, which I'd attended in Nairobi. And they had a sign when you landed in Zanzibar that you had to pay $10 to enter the country, either with US money, German marks, or French francs. And I had been living in Germany, so I had French marks. I'd been teaching in Germany for 6 months. And they said they were not going to take the German money, that I was a US citizen if I claimed to be a US citizen. So where was the US money? I had no US money because I had been in Germany for six months. So finally, a lady from WHO came from Lesotho and gave them British sterling pounds and got me out. Knocked on the door. Oh my
gosh.
She was next to me. And then it was scary because I had to pay $10, equivalent $10 to get out, to go back to Nairobi. And so Rachel Robinson happened to be in Tanzania with her son. And I had to get some British guys to get me out of Zanzibar, and all those same custom agents were there when I got back to the airport. And when the white guy says, "You're going to put her on the plane," these Black men said, "Yes, Bwana."
Yes,
so I was really angry. I was glad to leave, but they said, "Yes, Bwana."
Oh, wow. Well, what was the embassy called or involved in any way?
This was the day that the currency was being changed too. It was just a mess. So no, the embassy was not called, but I got out, and Vietnam was a disaster as well. That was 3 years ago. They were just downright nasty towards Black women coming in at the airport in Ho Chi Minh. So those are my work. Otherwise, it's been okay everywhere else, but those are the two worst experiences.
Oh boy. Oh, that's too bad. Princella? Are you there? Okay, we see you. Unmute. Did you unmute?
No, I thought I unmuted. Thank you.
Okay, there.
You're asking about my travels abroad to the UK, to London, to Mexico, Belize, the Caribbean Isles, Guatemala, Scotland, that area.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. What are some of your experiences?
They were pretty. I mean, they were all good experiences.
Yeah.
It's always good for me, I think, to learn new cultures. It always keeps my mind open.
Uh-huh.
The learning part, I appreciated a lot. I always felt I didn't have enough time to spend there, but
Yeah.
other than that, they were good experiences.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Carmen, what about you? Are you there, Carmen?
I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here. I can't even single out anything in particular. You know, it's just too much to put it in a 30-second blip.
But where are some of the places you've been?
Well, you know, throughout West Africa, well, in Southern and East Africa and the Caribbean mostly.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Yeah, you know, in my case, when I go places, you know, I'm one of these kind of people where they put me everywhere in the world except the United States.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Yeah. So just depends on where I am, you know, they will find a place for me there, including in Africa. So it's
Yep.
really interesting that they do that. But like you say, you know, we all come from different experiences and frames of reference.
Uh-huh.
And people are going to use their own frame of reference in order to identify you.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Who else? Is Sandra Lang still there?
No,
She had to go.
She said thank you for the presentation.
Okay. Well, I know Sandra has gone back and forth to, you know, Africa a zillion times. She has a lot of experience and has beautiful things. But it's like you said, it depends on where you are and how they identify. Because how many of you know where La Réunion is?
I do.
One person. Yeah,
Yep.
it's in the Indian Ocean, right
Ocean.
off of Africa. And when that girl said, "Oh, find me somebody from home," and then she said in French, La Réunion, and I was like, okay, I'm not from there. You know, I didn't want to admit that. I didn't even know where Martinique and Guadeloupe were the first time I went to Europe. And everybody, even a nun, came up to me once and said, "Oh, seeing you just reminds me of the wonderful time I spent in your area." And I said, "California." And so, you know, and you don't, when you first start traveling, you don't expect that because you think, oh, you know. There was another little incident, and then I'll close. But my niece and my son, when I was posted to Paris, you know, the son was always going to live with me, but the niece had just graduated from high school, and she was already fluent in Spanish. Her mother's from Mexico, and so she wanted to learn French. And she said, "Can I come spend an academic year with you, and then, you know, go back to college?" And I said, "Yeah." And so the first night they were there, the second night they were there, and I was going to take them around. And I said, "Where do you want to go?" And they said, "McDonald's." I said, "What?" Well, I ended up giving in, and we went to McDonald's. It was really crowded, and there was one guy that saw her, and he was just Google-eyed. He was like, you know. And so I said, you know, her name is Isa. We call her Isa, Eloisa. But I said, "Isa, don't look now, but there's a guy that's really, you know, taken with you." And she's like, "Where?" And she looked all around, and I had been out of the States long enough that my mindset had changed a little bit. But she looked at every Black guy in there, and she says, "Nobody's looking at me." And this guy had never taken it. And I failed to say that, you know, he was white. I think he was Norwegian, so he was Scandinavian. He was, you know, but she couldn't see him because we've been programmed, you know, in such a way that it didn't even occur to her that it would be a white guy. And later, during her time there, she was always taken for a Moroccan or something like that because she, she's mixed Mexican and black and brown skin, but sort of long hair, and so she'd say, "How can they think?" But afterwards, her social, the change that I saw in her, the mostly Africans, North Africans, and others, and her attitude during that year changed so much, and she's still been in touch over the years with a lot of the friends that she made while she was living in Paris. And by the way, she ended up staying 3 years. She going to school, but I only stayed 2 during that tour, but she stayed another year with a friend. So yeah, it really did change her trajectory. So thank you guys for coming, and hopefully in 2 weeks, every 2 weeks now, we'll be meeting. For those of you, and let me repeat, if you have pen and paper and if you're interested, my email is Judy D. Francis, FRANCIS, @hotmail.com, and be sure to put OLLI in the subject matter so I don't delete it. And if you have anything you want to bring up or ask or tell me to include, whatever. But thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful presentation.
Second.
Yeah.
We're not meeting next Tuesday. That day is off, but we'll see you guys again on March 22nd. And what is your topic for that session?
Oh, good question. I don't remember. Oh, sorry about that.
But double check the course list on
Yeah.
the website and on the Google Calendar. We've got, I think it's 5 more sessions in the series, and these have been so super informative. So we just want to thank Miss Judy one more time.
And yeah. What is it? Darn it, Black Diplomat. And then
That's okay.
Okay. Oh, okay. It's called first intro to Africa, friend or foe.
Mm.
Because well, you'll understand.
So we're looking forward to that
Yeah.
session.
Yeah, sounds good.
My very first country was Zaire when Mobutu was in power. So that was quite an introduction to Africa.
We're really looking forward to it. So I'm going to say goodbye to Brenda, Debbie, Carmen, Lina, Sandra, thank you for joining us. And we hope you have a good week. And hopefully, just a quick reminder for those who are available in the area, we're having an OLLI Town Hall this Friday from 12 to 2, March 11th.
11th.
And hopefully you guys can join in and meet Fawn Supernong, who's our new OLLI director, and give her your great feedback and your welcomes and your special requests. And we want to hear all the good feelings from our OLLI members so we can make sure we OLLI more live more.
We OLLI more live more.
All right.